In ancient Macedon, a boy named Alexander was born. His father, King Philip II, transformed Macedon into a formidable power. His mother, Olympias, fueled tales of divine parentage, shaping Alexander's sense of destiny. Observing his father, he dreamed of leading armies to conquer new worlds. The tale of Bucephalus, a wild stallion, revealed Alexander's unique insight. He tamed the horse, showcasing his ability to understand fear and turn it into strength. Alexander and Bucephalus became inseparable, charging into the world's greatest battles, promising future greatness. The world Alexander was born into was a tapestry of ancient cultures. The Greek city-states, like Athens and Sparta, were centers of philosophy and art, weakened by war. To the north, the Macedonians, viewed as outsiders, were united by King Philip. To the east lay the mighty Persian Empire, the superpower of its day. For any Greek, Persia was the ultimate prize. Tutored by Aristotle, Alexander developed a love for Greek culture. He wanted to spread Greek ideals, creating something lasting in his wake. Before a boy can become a king, he must be tested. At 16, Alexander was left in charge of Macedon. A Thracian tribe rebelled, underestimating the boy prince. Alexander crushed the rebellion and founded Alexandropolis. At the Battle of Cheronea, Alexander commanded a wing of the army. He faced the elite Theban sacred band. Alexander led a cavalry charge that shattered their lines, securing victory. As Alexander's star rose, tensions grew with Philip. The kingdom was plunged into chaos, thrusting Alexander onto the throne. The age of Alexander was about to begin. The year is 336 BC. King Philip II is hosting a lavish festival to mark his daughter's wedding. Suddenly, the celebration shatters as Pausanias, one of Philip's bodyguards, attacks. Philip falls, and chaos erupts. The most powerful man in Greece is dead, throwing the kingdom into turmoil. Alexander acts with speed and is immediately acclaimed king. A new king has been crowned in a storm of blood and betrayal. Alexander now finds himself ruler of a kingdom on the brink of collapse. A crown secured in blood must be defended with steel. Alexander knew his grasp on the throne was fragile. His father's death was a signal to every enemy of Macedon. The tribes to the north began to stir, seeing a young, untested king. They started plotting rebellion, thinking the empire would crumble. Alexander was surrounded by enemies. His first priority was to eliminate any threats from within. He could not afford to leave any rivals alive. He began a swift and ruthless purge. This was a dark and bloody beginning to his reign. Alexander was not a naive boy, capable of extreme brutality. He had paid the blood price for the crown. The world outside was already moving against him. He had to remind the world, with force, that the death of the king did not mean the death of Macedonian power. His first campaigns would be against his own rebellious subjects. In 335 BC, Alexander marched north, a force of nature against the Thracian tribes. The Macedonian army, with its fearsome phalanx, was unstoppable. Alexander's speed stunned enemies, crushing the revolt in Thebes after false rumors of his death. The Thebans, defiant, faced the Unbreakable Fist of Macedon. Their refusal sealed their city's fate. The siege of Thebes was savage. Alexander's army stormed the city walls, and the fighting was fierce. The resistance was broken. The battle turned into a massacre. The city was now a scene of utter devastation. He wanted to make an example of Thebes, a lesson so terrible that no other Greek city would ever dare to defy him again. Their verdict was merciless. The city of Thebes was to be razed to the ground. The fate of Thebes sent a shockwave of terror throughout Greece. This young king was not a man to be trifled with. He had crushed all opposition, secured his borders, and unified his kingdom. He had proven himself a worthy successor. They would take on the Persian Empire. It was a promise of fire, a promise of glory. In 334 BC, Alexander stood on the shores of Asia, ready to challenge the Persian Empire. He led an army of 40,000 men. His first act was pure theater, claiming Asia by right of conquest. He then visited Troy, making offerings to Achilles, seeing himself as the new hero. The Persians gathered their forces near the Granicus River, determined to stop him. Confident, they held the high ground, believing Alexander would charge straight into their trap. Arriving at the Granicus, his generals advised caution, but Alexander saw an opportunity. He gave the order to advance, charging across the river. The victory at the Granicus River was stunning. Alexander shattered the first Persian army. The path into Asia Minor was now open. City after city opened its gates to him, hailing him as a liberator. News of the defeat reached Darius III, the King of Kings. He commanded armies that numbered in the hundreds of thousands and began to gather a grand army. While Darius gathered his forces, Alexander continued his march, securing his supply lines. A great confrontation was now inevitable. Darius III was marching west with his immense army, as Alexander marched east to meet him. Somewhere in Syria, the two men would meet. The fate of the Persian Empire would be decided on a single field of battle. It was a clash of titans. In the autumn of 333 BC, the two armies drew close. Alexander was marching down the coast of Syria. Darius, with his enormous host, was moving through the inland plains. Darius had a crucial choice to make. He could wait for Alexander on the wide, open plains, where his superior numbers, especially his cavalry, would give him a massive advantage. This was the sensible, logical military decision. But Darius was growing impatient. He was the king of kings, and this Macedonian boy had been running rampant in his territory for over a year. He listened to advisors who told him to trap Alexander, to cut off his line of retreat. So Darius made a fateful error. He led his massive army through mountain passes and emerged on the coast behind Alexander's army. He had successfully cut the Macedonians off from their supply lines. From a strategic point of view, it was a brilliant move. Darius was now positioned between Alexander and Macedon. He must have felt a surge of triumph. He believed he had the young king trapped. But in doing so, he had moved the battlefield from the open plains to the narrow coastal plain near a town called Issus. The battlefield was a tight corridor, with mountains on one side and the sea on the other. This was a disaster for the Persians. The narrow space meant that Darius could not deploy his entire army. The vast numbers he had brought were now useless. His massive force was crammed together, unable to maneuver or to use its numerical superiority. He had unwittingly chosen a battlefield that perfectly suited Alexander's smaller, more nimble and better disciplined force. When Alexander learned that Darius was behind him, he was not alarmed. He was overjoyed. He turned his army around and marched back to face the enemy. He knew that Darius had just thrown away his greatest advantage. The battle of nerves was over, and Alexander had won before the first sword was even drawn. The two armies lined up facing each other across a small river called the Pinarus. On one side, the Macedonians stood in their disciplined ranks, a compact force of hardened professionals. On the other, the Persian army stretched out, a vast and colorful sea of different peoples from across the empire, but they were compressed and in disarray. In the center of the Persian line, surrounded by his best infantry and cavalry, was Darius himself. He sat high in a magnificent war chariot, a towering figure from which he intended to command his great victory. He did not know that Alexander's entire plan was focused on one single objective, him. The Battle of Issus was brutal. Alexander led his companion cavalry, charging towards Darius. Darius watched in horror as Alexander carved a path toward him. He ordered his charioteer to flee, signaling a total collapse. The battle turned into a slaughter. Alexander captured the Persian camp and royal family, treating them with respect. But Darius escaped, and Alexander faced a choice: pursue him or secure Egypt. He chose Egypt. Darius offered Alexander territory, his daughter, and gold for peace. Alexander refused. He wanted it all. The final confrontation was yet to come at Gaugamela. After victory at Issus, Alexander marched south, aiming to neutralize the Persian navy by capturing Phoenician cities. Most surrendered, but Tyre, a wealthy island fortress, refused. They denied Alexander access to their main temple, an act of defiance he wouldn't ignore. To take the city, Alexander embarked on an impossible engineering feat, building a causeway to the island. Despite naval attacks and storms, he rebuilt the causeway, gathered a fleet, and constructed massive siege towers. Tyre's defiance only strengthened his resolve. The city would fall, no matter the cost. After a long siege, Tyre was brutally conquered. Alexander then marched to Egypt. Egypt surrendered peacefully, welcoming Alexander as a liberator from Persian rule. Showing respect for Egyptian customs, he was declared Pharaoh. More than a title, this made him a living god in their eyes. He journeyed to the oracle of Zeus Ammon, emerging with a profound sense of his divine mission to rule the world. In Egypt, Alexander founded Alexandria, a city on the Mediterranean coast near the Nile. He saw its potential as a trade hub linking Greece and Egypt. Though Alexander left, Alexandria flourished, becoming a cosmopolitan center. It housed the Library of Alexandria, a beacon of learning for centuries. Alexandria was Alexander's vision of a lasting empire, a center of culture and knowledge. With Egypt secure, Alexander turned east. Darius raised a second grand army, even larger than before, including scythed chariots and war elephants. He chose a wide, flat plain near Gaugamela, perfect for his massive army. Alexander's veterans, though outnumbered, approached the vast Persian host. Rejecting a night attack, Alexander declared, "I will not steal my victory." His empire was transforming, no longer just Macedonian or Greek. He was now ruler of diverse peoples, learning to govern as a sovereign. Gaugamela was not just for territory, but for the right to rule this new multicultural world. After Gaugamela, the Persian Empire lay broken. The road to the heart of Persia was now open to Alexander. He marched to Babylon, one of the world's greatest cities, surrendering peacefully to Alexander. Next, he moved to Susa, seizing an immense treasury. But Alexander was not yet satisfied. He still had to capture Persepolis. The march was difficult, fighting through the Zagros Mountains. Finally, he arrived at Persepolis. After plundering the city, he ordered the palace to be burned to the ground. The destruction of Persepolis sent a clear message: the Persian Empire was truly over. Alexander's men were ready to go home, but his ambition knew no bounds. He pursued the fleeing King Darius into Bactria and Sogdia, now Afghanistan. Darius was found murdered by his own nobles. Alexander hunted down the assassins, spending 3 years in a brutal guerrilla war. He founded new cities to secure the region. With Bessus executed and the provinces subdued, Alexander stood at the edge of the known world. To the east lay India, a land of legend. Driven by curiosity, he marched his army over the Hindu Kush mountains. In the spring of 326 BC, Alexander led his army across the Indus River and into the Punjab, the land of 5 rivers. He had entered a world entirely different from Persia or Greece. India was a mosaic of competing kingdoms, ruled by powerful local kings. Some submitted to Alexander, hoping to use his power against their rivals, but others were determined to resist. The most formidable was a king named Porus, whose kingdom lay between the Hydaspes and Assassines rivers. Porus was a giant of a man, known for his bravery and pride, and he had no intention of bowing to a foreign invader. He gathered his army to block Alexander's path at the Hydaspes River. The army of Porus presented Alexander with his most terrifying challenge yet. It wasn't just the number of soldiers, it was the presence of 200 war elephants, arrayed like living fortresses along the riverbank. The Macedonian horses were terrified of these strange beasts and refused to go near them. The river itself was swollen from monsoon rains, making a direct assault impossible. Porus was confident that Alexander could not cross. For days, the two armies faced each other across the water, a tense standoff between the master of the West and the proud king of the East. Alexander resorted to a brilliant strategy of deception. For several nights, he moved his troops noisily up and down his side of the river, feigning attempts to cross at different points. This kept Porus's army on high alert, constantly moving to counter threats that never materialized. Eventually, Porus grew weary of the false alarms. Then, under cover of a fierce thunderstorm, Alexander made his real move. He left a portion of his army in the main camp and secretly marched 17 miles upstream. There, he began a perilous crossing at a concealed location. Porus was stunned to learn Alexander was across and now threatening his flank. He had to split his forces, sending some to deal with the landing. The battle that followed was Alexander's tactical masterpiece, but also his most costly. The Macedonian phalanx faced the terrifying charges of war elephants. The beasts crashed into their lines, grabbing soldiers and trampling them underfoot. But Alexander's men were disciplined. They targeted the elephants' drivers and wounded the animals with javelins, causing them to run amok in panic. After a long and savage struggle, Alexander's cavalry enveloped the Indian army, and Porus's forces were finally defeated. King Porus fought bravely. Brought before Alexander, Porus famously replied, "Treat me, Alexander, like a king." Alexander, moved by his dignity, restored his kingdom and made him an ally. Alexander wanted to press on, but his army had reached its breaking point after 8 years of campaigning. At the Hyphasis River, the army refused to go further. Reluctantly, Alexander agreed to turn for home. He led his army through the Gedrosian desert, a catastrophic decision. Thousands died of thirst and starvation. After the ordeal in the Gedrosian desert, Alexander's army returned to Persia. The king's absence had led to corruption. He moved swiftly, executing corrupt officials. The years in the east had transformed Alexander. He was now ruler of a vast multicultural empire. He adopted Persian customs, unsettling his Macedonian veterans. His vision was a new, blended culture. To them, Alexander's actions felt like a betrayal. Alexander saw this as essential for his empire's survival. His goal was homonoia, unity between different peoples. In 324 BC, Alexander staged a mass wedding in Susa, marrying Persian princesses himself and ordering his top officers to do the same. The event was a dazzling display of wealth and power, meant to unite Macedonian and Persian elites. Alexander paid soldiers' debts and gave dowries, hoping to win loyalty and fuse cultures. But many Macedonians saw the marriages as forced and resented the loss of their identity. The Susa Weddings, intended to create unity, instead deepened the divide between Alexander and his men. Despite the spectacle, the policy's success was uncertain, and tensions simmered beneath the surface. At Opis, Alexander announced he'd discharge his veteran Macedonians and replace them with 30,000 Persian recruits. The Macedonians erupted in open mutiny, feeling betrayed and discarded. Alexander responded ruthlessly, executing the ringleaders and shaming his men with a furious speech. He withdrew, elevating Persians to high honors, leaving his Macedonian soldiers desperate and fearful. Overcome with regret, the army begged for forgiveness outside his palace. The mutiny collapsed. Alexander's authority was absolute. But the rift between king and army had never been wider. After Opis, Alexander reconciled with his men, but the loneliness of power grew. He began to embrace his own divinity, demanding recognition as a god. The death of his closest friend, Hephaestion, devastated him, deepening his isolation. In Babylon, Alexander planned new conquests, but his health and spirit were waning. He was a visionary and conqueror, but also a man worn down by grief and ambition. As he reached the height of his power, a final unseen enemy approached. In Babylon, Alexander prepared for new campaigns, but at a banquet he fell ill with a fever. His condition worsened rapidly. Soon he could only acknowledge his soldiers from his sickbed. The army, gripped by fear, filed past their dying king, unable to imagine life without him. Alexander lost consciousness and died days later, the cause still a mystery. Rumors of poison swirled, but the world's greatest conqueror was felled by an invisible foe. The man who had survived countless battles was gone. His death left an empire in shock and uncertainty. Alexander's death shattered his empire, leaving no clear successor. His generals, lacking his vision and authority, faced chaos and infighting. The vast, diverse empire began to unravel as old rivalries resurfaced. The dream of unity and cultural fusion died with him. The Susa weddings were quickly undone. Macedonian officers abandoned their Persian wives. Alexander's vision was replaced by brutal power struggles. A world once united, now divided. The unity of the empire did not last a single day after Alexander's death. His most powerful generals, known to history as the Diadochi or the Successors, immediately began to jockey for position. Men like Ptolemy, a clever and cautious strategist, Perdiccas, the ambitious regent, Antigonus the one-eyed, a battle-hardened veteran, and Seleucus, a brilliant commander, all had their own ambitions. At first they tried to hold the empire together in the name of Alexander's unborn son and his half-brother. They divided the vast territories among themselves, not as kings, but as governors or satraps, theoretically ruling on behalf of a united throne. But this arrangement was a fiction from the very start. The peace was fragile and short-lived. The generals' ambition and mistrust of one another were just too great. Soon, the empire was plunged into a series of devastating civil wars that would last for nearly half a century. The very army that Alexander had led to conquer the world was now turned upon itself. Macedonians fought Macedonians in bloody battles across Persia, Asia Minor, and Greece. Alliances were made and broken in an instant. Betrayal was commonplace. The dream of a unified world devolved into a brutal, free-for-all power struggle. The generals were no longer fighting for Alexander's legacy. They were carving out their own kingdoms from its corpse. Out of this long and chaotic conflict, several major new kingdoms eventually emerged, built upon the ruins of Alexander's empire. Ptolemy secured Egypt, the wealthiest and most easily defensible province. He declared himself Pharaoh and established a dynasty that would rule for 300 years, ending only with the death of his famous descendant, Cleopatra. Seleucus seized control of the vast eastern territories from Syria to the borders of India, founding the Seleucid Empire. Antigonus's descendants eventually secured control of Macedon and Greece. The unified world of Alexander was permanently shattered, replaced by a new system of powerful Hellenistic states. These new kingdoms were Alexander's most tangible political legacy. They were ruled by Greek-speaking dynasties, who brought Greek culture, language, and administration to the east. Cities like Alexandria in Egypt, Antioch in Syria, and Pergamon in Asia Minor became major centers of Greek civilization, hubs of trade, art, and learning. While Alexander's unified political empire had failed, his cultural vision had, in a way, succeeded. He had broken down the old barriers between East and West, creating a new, interconnected world. This new Hellenistic world would dominate the region for centuries and would form the bridge between classical Greece and the later rise of Rome. Though his empire shattered and his bloodline died out, the legend of Alexander the Great only grew with time. He became more than just a historical figure. He became a myth, a benchmark against which all future conquerors would measure themselves. Roman generals like Pompey and Julius Caesar studied his campaigns and dreamed of emulating his achievements. The story of his life, a dramatic tale of a brilliant young man who conquered the world in a decade, became a source of endless fascination. His name echoed through the centuries, a synonym for supreme ambition and unparalleled military genius. He set a standard for glory that would never be surpassed. His most profound legacy was the cultural transformation of the world he conquered. By toppling the Persian Empire and leading his Greek armies to the Indus, he dramatically accelerated the spread of Greek ideas, language, and culture across the Middle East and Central Asia. This new era is known as the Hellenistic Age. The Greek language became the common tongue of commerce, government, and scholarship from Italy to Afghanistan. Greek styles of art, architecture, and theater became widespread. This blending of Greek and Eastern traditions created a vibrant, cosmopolitan new civilization that was dynamic and innovative, profoundly shaping the world for generations to come. This Hellenistic world, which Alexander inadvertently created, had a direct and lasting impact on the future course of history. It was the world into which the Roman Republic expanded, and the Romans were deeply influenced by the Greek culture they encountered. It was also the world into which Christianity was born. The existence of a common Greek language across the Eastern Mediterranean allowed the teachings of Jesus and the writings of apostles like Paul to spread far more rapidly than they otherwise would have. The New Testament was written in Greek, the language of Alexander's empire, a testament to his long and indirect influence on one of the world's great religions. In the end, Alexander remains a figure of profound contradictions. He was a brilliant visionary who dreamed of uniting humanity, yet he was also a brutal conqueror who slaughtered thousands and razed cities. He was a student of Aristotle who spread Greek philosophy, and a ruthless warlord who ordered political executions. He was a man who believed himself to be a god, and a leader who was ultimately defeated by the human limitations of his own followers. His life was a brief, blazing comet across the sky of history. It lasted little more than a decade, but the light from its passage illuminated the world for centuries, and its echo continues to be heard even today.